Y'all have my slides, by chance, Morgan Murphy? All right. In 1999, I joined the U.S. Navy, thinking that I'd follow in the footsteps of my ancestors, another Captain Morgan. We didn't call him a pirate, we called him a seafaring entrepreneur. And then the United States got into 20 years of forever wars, and I kept getting sent places with the U.S. Army, which is no fun if you're a Navy guy. If you're a Navy guy, you show up on the ship, they say, would you like some strawberry ice cream? Here's your stateroom. You eat off a silver service. It's really a gentleman's outfit. The Army, you show up and they're like, do you have your sleep system? I said, what's that? A sleeping bag. Do you have your ACH, sir? I said, what's that? Advanced combat helmet. Why didn't you just call it a helmet? Do you have your entrenchment tool? What's that? A shovel. Great. So that's what we're talking about today, is shovels, because we need to start digging. So an F-35 Joint Strike Fighter is 20% titanium. The V-22 Osprey is 30% titanium. The Boeing 787 is 15% titanium. The United States is completely reliant on the import, 100% reliant on the import of titanium sponge. The United States makes no titanium sponge whatsoever. Let's talk about rare earths for a moment. Here's a smattering of rare earths and what they're used for. You can just read they're critical in medicine, they're critical in magnets, they're critical in the making of computers and supercomputers and lasers, and you name it, we need rare earths. Here's where they come from. As my colleagues have aptly pointed out, 92% of our rare earths come from China. There are a lot of reasons for that, and I won't get into all of them. Today I want to talk about just one critical mineral to share with you, and that's thorium. Thorium was discovered in 1828. I'm going to give you a brief history lesson. Marie Curie discovered its radioactivity at the latter half of that century. It's 3 times more abundant in the Earth's crust than uranium, and there are an estimate 25,000 tons of it globally, and most of the available inventory of thorium can actually be pulled up when you're mining rare earths. And that's what makes mining rare earths, at least in the West, difficult. In the United States, thorium is defined as a source material by the Atomic Energy Act. It's governed by the EPA and the NRC. So if you want to take your entrenchment tool and start digging up rare earths, you're probably going to hit thorium, and that causes a big headache for those who mine critical minerals. I want to go down the road of thorium just a bit further with you. This man here, we talked about Oppenheimer just a few minutes ago, so if you watched Oppenheimer, you'll know the Manhattan Project. Alvin Weinberg is the gentleman's name. He worked on the original Manhattan Project. And the Department of Defense was very concerned in the early 1940s that there would not be enough uranium to go around. So they tasked Dr. Weinberg with coming up for an alternate fuel source to uranium, and that he developed a molten salt breeder reactor. Now, I'm an English literature major, so I'm going to try to give this to you as simply as I can using some English major type analogies, all right? So a molten salt liquefies at 933 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius. I only know freedom units. But that is, it flows as freely as water at that temperature. And so you can mix the critical mineral with it. You can mix thorium with it. And it's like having your gasoline and your antifreeze in the same mixture. It both cools the process and it powers the process. So in a molten salt reactor, it's actually a passive, it's a walk away. Homer Simpson could run this plant and it would not melt down, because if there is a leak at the plant, salt freezes at about 900 degrees Fahrenheit, so it becomes a solid again, and the whole process stops. So it's a passive safety system, and this is not just a theoretical, what we call a paper power plant. Oak Ridge ran and tested a molten salt breeder reactor using Alvin Weinberg's design from 1965 to 1969. And they discovered that it could also burn spent plutonium and spent uranium. Now think about that for a second. What are most people's major two concerns with nuclear power? One, that we'll have a Chernobyl or a 3 Mile Island or a Fukushima-like accident. And two, where do we dispose the waste? Thorium solves both of those issues. Unfortunately, in the wisdom of Congress in the early 1970s, they had a down select. So in 1972, the Atomic Energy Commission said, well, we don't need two. We got to pick one. And they picked uranium. And they picked uranium not because it was a superior technology. They picked it because the military was more familiar with it. You may know Admiral Rickover, the United States Navy, who pioneered the Nautilus using a light water reactor, which made sense on a submarine when you're out in the ocean and it's the world's biggest heat sink. They needed a compact reactor to go on a submarine. Because of our familiarity with those reactors in the early part of the nuclear program, we just picked what we knew, and we went with what we knew. And of course, this was before all of those accidents I just mentioned. This is well before 3 Mile Island, and we down blended it. Unfortunately, we put that on a shelf and left it there. And when I first heard this story, I thought, well, surely this is fake. It can't be possible that we actually have the technology and we have the abundant strategic mineral to power the world. But in fact, we do. Here are just a handful of the many documents that you can go and look for yourself. The first one on that upper left-hand corner is from 1941. That's Alvin Weinberg's paper there. The Department of Energy is still studying it. And you might be interested to know the United States in 2012, China was very interested in the thorium reactor. And so in 2012, you see there on the upper right-hand side, the Department of Energy wholesale transferred all of the United States thorium technology to China in a partnership between the Chinese Academy of Science and the U.S. Department of Energy. That's about a 300-page document, the first of their meetings. I had to FOIA that document to get a hold of it, but that's Freedom of Information Act. For those of you not from the United States, to get a hold of that document. I think we did it with good intentions because China was burning a lot of coal, and the administration at the time thought it would be a good idea to give them a technology they were interested in. Like that, the small paper, and you can't see it, this eye chart right here, is where they are today with it. So they've just launched their first thorium test reactor in the desert in May, and they'll probably have a full-scale reactor by the end of this decade. This is just a visual chart of the advantages of thorium. So that little green cube there that you see is 1 ton of thorium burns in a reactor and you get 1 ton of waste. The uranium process is much more wasteful. So you can see you need 30 or 250 tons of uranium and to burn the same amount of energy that you'd get from a ton of thorium. So almost all thorium is fertile, and it doesn't need to be enriched. This is a major problem for the United States. It's a major problem for developed nations because where does our enriched uranium come from? Anyone? Russia. Russia. The United States is getting 100% of its enriched uranium from Russia. So we're wagging our finger at Germany saying you're getting your natural gas from Russia, but we're getting 20% of our grid from Russia. Not a smart strategy. The other advantage of thorium, and I'll wrap this up here quickly, but the other advantage of thorium is spent thorium has a much shorter life as a hazardous material than uranium. Uranium is estimated to cause 100,000 years of maintenance to make sure. In fact, they've designed, graphic artists have designed scary looking logos that in case 100,000 years from now someone doesn't speak our language, they can look at those logos and know it's something dangerous. Whereas thorium really dissipates in 300 years. So it's a much easier disposal issue. And lastly, it's much cheaper to build a thorium reactor than it is a light water cooled reactor. You have to keep a LWR under enormous pressure. So that takes 18 feet of reinforced concrete and 9 inches of steel to keep all that pressure in. A thorium plant is unpressurized, so it's cheaper to market. The danger there is a country like China could export thorium power on their Belt and Road Initiative. They could do that without fear of proliferation of nuclear weapons, because thorium makes a really bad nuclear weapon. It makes really efficient power, but it makes a very bad nuclear weapon. And as we've seen in this century, conflict breaks out over energy. This is what a potential, this is a former constituent of ours, has designed, had an artist rendering of what a nuclear power plant, a thorium nuclear power plant would look like. You notice there aren't the gigantic cooling towers and all the concrete, so it's much more inexpensive to build. This is the reactor, the first breeder reactor I mentioned that was developed at Oak Ridge. And I would just end here by saying the promise of technology and critical minerals is so rich. And it's worth us taking the time as leaders to look into and to study and to maybe explore some of these pieces and take them off the shelf. 1 ton of thorium can create the same amount of energy as 3.5 million tons of coal. So put another way, this coffee cup could contain enough energy to power you and your family for your entire life, contained in a coffee cup. That's the brilliance of mankind. That's the brilliance of science. And I think that that will be hope for us in the future with strategic minerals. Thank you.